to our case study part 2, but we're also going to be looking at 3.2, explain the impact. So this one will focus on a bit more of mental health, ill health on individuals, families, communities, and others. So we're mainly focusing now on 3.2. So black male, now 25 years old, relocated to a new county without police relocation, unconfirmed father figure, potential half sibling now in their life, continues to have minimal affiliation with gangs, but still sells drugs. Subject to a robbery at gunpoint, where he is robbed of money which would have been used to purchase drugs to sell, and jewelry. What do we think might be some of the consequences? So what we're saying now is we are going to explain the impact of everything that has happened to this young man, to his families, and maybe the communities around him. So the gang and youth violence is playing an impact on the community. This young man has been involved in the murder of a young boy, gone to prison, come out, seen a lot inside. What might be the impact of mental ill health on the individual, either him, maybe his mom, other family members? And I want to hear the language around mental health, what might be going on for this young person with mental health.
Post-traumatic stress.
Post-traumatic stress, so PTSD. Who was that? Was that Anne?
Yeah. He might be depressed.
PTSD, might be depressed. What else might be going on for him? Not just that. And I'm going to say 3.2 specifically here, Anne. Yep.
Okay.
So he might be experiencing PTSD. Tell me a bit about what we might see if we were seeing the symptoms of his PTSD. What might we see?
Low mood swings.
Easily agitated.
Angry.
Inconsistent relationships, sexual relationships.
I don't hear that because my boom was up on my mic. Anger. Angry.
Bit of an antisocial personality.
Hey.
I think there's also an element of fear as well.
What was that?
There's also an element of fear as well.
What might the fear be around?
Well, everything that they've kind of witnessed, and what they might experience again in the future. Obviously, there's an element there where he's not involved in gang affiliation, but still resorting to the behaviours that got him in the situation that he was in. And it's a case of getting involved up in that again, and then becoming experienced to what he's experienced in prison, or getting further into the gang and drug culture again. And what that might bring on the family, even though he's out of area, and the potential other family members that he has that doesn't really know about as well.
So what was it that you said about family? What might be the impact on the family?
Because he's out of area and he's obviously been involved previously in that area, he doesn't have control over what might happen to his family because he's away now. But he also has other family members that he's not fully confirmed, but could be in danger now as well, and he has no control over that now because he's out of area.
He could also be in danger of other gangs selling drugs. He could be in danger of violence from them.
Okay.
It could affect how he dresses, like his self-dignity, how he presents his home as well, like how much he loves himself.
Yeah, I was going to say that, maybe a bit of self-hatred, self-loathing for the position that he's in, for the things that he's done.
Okay. Self-hatred. I think everyone's given some on this, not just you, Anne. Yeah. Okay. So low mood. We might see low mood swings, easily agitated. He might be depressed. Tell me what depressed might display as. What might we see if we saw him depressed? We've said some of it. So we talked about the way that he dresses.
Yeah, personal hygiene, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
self-neglect.
Probably one of the key first things to go when people are maybe depressed and not wanting to get up and maybe do those sort of routine. Self-neglect, his love for himself, self-hatred.
He might isolate himself, especially when he's been robbed. Tend not to go out then.
Yeah. Isolate himself. So these are all some of the consequences on the individual.
I don't know if my mic was working on it, but I did say about dating and relationships.
Oh,
I
you
think a
did.
lot.
I heard.
Yeah. I think a lot of young men sometimes get a lot of stick from people about how they're not consistent in relationships, but it's not. It's maybe a lack of understanding that that they're going through something and they can't go commit and do.
Oh. So what might they be weary of in terms of relationships?
Getting too close to somebody.
Okay.
Having a child.
Yeah, yeah.
Lack of trust and attachment issues.
Yeah. Attachment seems to be something that comes up quite frequently, doesn't it? How we kind of make those connections with others is really, really, really significant. And probably not something that is fully explored all the time when we're looking at how someone is displaying present day behaviors. So we said, so the red bits are linked to your sort of like your depression, your low mood swings. Let me link that to your and isolating yourself. And these are sort of like all sort of linked into someone who might be quite depressed. So you see the impact that an incident, a robbery, being held up at gunpoint, going through the criminal justice system, coming out. So we've looked at the person. Let's explore family more, because this criteria wants us to explain the impact on individuals and families. What might the impact be on family if they've got a young child or mother, siblings? What might be the impact on family?
If he's depressed, if he is like really quite chronically depressed, you know, there's potential neglect of the children. You know, I've heard of kids sort of saying they've had to get themselves like cold soup out of the cupboard because their mum's just too sad to get off the couch. You know, she's just too depressed. She hasn't got that in her at the moment. It's not because she doesn't love or care for the child. She's just really struggling herself.
That's quite a broken family. We've said individuals. What about the community? Young person's been murdered within the community. Gang and youth violence. Someone has got off. Maybe some have been sentenced. What might be the impact on the community?
Division. Divide the community.
Or retaliation from some parts of the community that might want to retaliate to the person that they think has perpetrated the violence.
I mentioned when we were doing the window on the world, when my brother was stabbed, the young man that stabbed him was the son of my mom's friend that she had known for about 20 years before we were even born. Their friendship has never been the same. I remember him coming to the house, seeing my mom, seeing my brother, and him being in tears, she being in tears. She's saying, your son's nearly killed my son. And he's saying, Val, I'm sorry. I don't know what to do. He just don't listen to anybody. And my brother wasn't in a gang or anything. He just went to a party, stepped on someone's foot, and it kind of escalated from there. And he's ended up being stabbed and survived. And it has really, really impacted him the whole of his life. He's in his late 40s now. And it's still something that he's really still traumatized by. So really, really good, guys. So you've answered your 3.2 in full. The case study male starts to display key signs of paranoia, looking over his shoulder, believes that the water is being poisoned, develops an entrenched issues around trusting others, further develops the delusion that his mom has planted implants called electrodes in his stomach to keep track of him. These have been upgraded by his daughter's mom when they met years later. So delusion, one of the classic signs and symptoms of a psychosis. Psychosis is the umbrella term for things like schizophrenia, bipolar, delusions, so that could be hallucinations, auditory of the senses, whatever, and thought disorder, key symptoms of schizophrenia. He contacts the government, the royal family, to write and protest his innocence of a murder he was cleared of 4 years prior, and sends them evidence, which is a blank tape. So those are the actual impacts, and some of what you've said can really relate to that, can't it? Low mood, issues around trust, attachments. So again, just really impressing that it can be really, really, really impacting on people. So we aren't going to go for breakouts. Any more input just in terms of that? Do you think that outcome, is that kind of what you thought it might be in terms of the consequences for this male?
Very much so.
The full diagnosis was paranoid schizophrenia. Yeah. Was under the mental health trust, eventually disengaged. So the schizophrenia was quite entrenched, and you know, they give you the first level of meds, second level of meds, third level of meds. He was quite resistant, but every time he got well, he would stop taking the medication because he thought, well, I don't need them because I'm well, and that kind of just perpetuated it. But again, really, really telling that part of his sort of like unwellness, a lot of the time he dwelled on the murder of that young boy. So the impact of some of that violence that happens to young people is really, really impacting.
Also the guilt.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. So yeah.
Michelle, can I ask a question? Did he always have these underlying mental health problems, or are you saying?
Not that I am aware of. Not that I am aware of. We did say he's actually deceased now, so passed away, but died not knowing who his dad was. So that was something that was really quite key. Family was very, very important to him, and not knowing who his dad was played a huge part in who he was, why he liked family, and all those sorts of things. So the theory, you know, it's real. Believe the hype. It does link. It does link. So
because of the void.
Sorry?
Of no father. I said because of the void of no father.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah. And it goes back to that issues of identity. So these are the bits. Think about the context, think about the environment. Again, you'll get these slides with all those answers that you guys have given. So it wasn't just Anne. I think I only got Anne's name, but that one, almost everyone. The only person I've not got ticked as doing one, but I think you may have spoken, Dan and Sasha. So we've updated the answers. These are your answers. So I think you've been quite in depth and really captured some of the actual outcomes. We've done the discussion, so we're not going to do that again. So 3.3, explain how mental health affects some groups more than others. We're going to have a look at that now, just in terms of some statistics. So Black people are up to 3 times more likely than white British people to access mental health treatment for a first episode of psychosis through the police or criminal justice system. That's still the case. If you think of David Lammy, the Lammy Report 2017, think he said on average, Black men would face an average of 10 years in terms of their sentence on top, in addition, as opposed to their white counterparts, and that's from the official statistics. So we're answering 3.3. Why do some groups experience mental health more than others? So these statistics are helping you to answer that. We talked about carers. 71% of carers have poor physical or mental health. That's the Mental Health Foundation. and NSPCC. I was a volunteer for them partly through COVID, not anymore. But their NSPCC report of 2020 said that there was increased parental and family stress brought on by COVID, reductions in protective services because everything became online. We weren't seeing people face to face. Intensification of pressures on children's emotional well-being caused by lockdown, and it can increase the risk of abuse and neglect. Absolutely. Where some people go to school and that's their safe haven, during COVID, they were stuck at home and unable to escape. So again, when we talk of intersectionality, the different groups, LGBT groups, minorities, so migrants will automatically be subjects of acculturation. Anyone who migrates to a new country will automatically face all the new barriers of that country, and they will be prone to additional mental health support needs. Language barriers, lack of access or recourse to funds, all those sorts of things will impact. 1 in 10 young people experience a mental health issue at any one time, and suicide is the leading cause. I think that's of people 5 to 19, we've said. We mentioned the Good Child report, the link that I send with the Padlet, lots of resources and reports on there, have a look at them. So about 13% of young people aged 5 to 19 meet a clinical, so that means a diagnosis. If you went to a GP or a psychologist, you would get a diagnosis for a mental health disorder. Not necessarily that they are going to get that diagnosis. We've talked about services and the fact that services aren't very reliable because of the lack of funding. Black History Month, there's been this documentary through the Fresh Cuts. So if you go onto the ITVX website and go through to Fresh Cuts, Alex Beresford did it was an episode called Black Boys Can Cry, and he explores the suicide of one of his close friends. So if you haven't seen it, it's a really good watch, and that will help you to formulate some of your answers as well. It involves a rapper who actually uses his writing and music to explore mental health. So really, really impactful. One for you to watch. All right, guys? So when we assess young people or adults, we use outcomes and measures. So has anyone ever been to a doctor, maybe feeling like under the weather or something going on, and the doctor asks you a series of questions? So your generalized anxiety forms will give you an indicator to the levels of anxiety. You can get these forms through these links on the website. Your generalized anxiety is your GAD-7. Your PHQ-9 will give you an indicator around depression. So it will tell you about cognition, whether or not they're sleeping, eating, suicidal thoughts, those sorts of things. Click the links, go and explore so that you can understand some of the tools. There are tools that are specific to young people. If you sign up, you've got to sign up, get an account, but they allow you access to those outcome measures. So if you don't have things within your service that measures, not necessarily sitting with a form, but maybe just asking a series of questions through a conversation can actually help you to kind of find out where young people are. Okay. So again, the impacts on mental health and communities. Give me a couple of things that we've said are some of the things that will impact communities. So this is explaining the impact of mental health. We've talked about individuals. We have mentioned communities. Maybe something that's happened in a community near you.
Would it be things like increased sort of crime through alcohol misuse, drug misuse, those kinds of either acquisitive crime to fund them, or you know the violence that comes out of using them?
Absolutely.
Those kinds of linked offences. So
when you think of mental health, for example, if it was a homeless person that was maybe committing that crime to maybe get some money so that they could afford like a hostel for the night, or because they know there's no bed for them tonight, maybe committing the crime so that they can maybe get the money to buy drugs or alcohol, all those sorts of things. What you might notice is when you go into more deprived areas, I come from an area called Lascelles. My partner comes from an area called Evesham, so like Stratford, Silesia, near there. And I don't think I've ever seen, well, locally, I've not seen any bookies where he is. I've not seen any chicken shops, so you've got to kind of go into what they might call the town, and they're not really big towns. But quite often what you see, if you walk up Lascelles Road from one end to the other, you'll find a number of chicken shops. So unhealthy food, those sorts of things will fuel physical health issues. Then you start to see multiple bookies. You're now starting to see that post offices will be selling alcohol as well in the post offices, so people will maybe collect benefits and then be utilizing it on buying alcohol. And as you go up, you will start to see that cash points are maybe free to access money. Then there starts being a charge the further you go up the road. So those are the sorts of things that you might find in certain communities that are more impoverished, where people will experience more levels or different multiple layers of intersectionality. Okay.
So it's exploitation, that, Michelle, isn't it?
Yeah. But you go on.
No, yeah, just as someone mentioned in the last session we had about the government doing more to help, youngsters, people, and you think we've got the same thing round by where I live. It's just like 7 or 8 bookies in like 50 square meters, and
and it just
live in a deprived area. Problematic gambling, and they put more in. And then, as you just said, they charge. I won't ever use a cash machine that charges me. I'll go somewhere else. But it's £5 to draw your money out. But it's exploitation, isn't it?
Yeah. But the impact on community is that, you use your local area, it becomes too expensive to travel out, and you're almost trapped within that zone. Almost your environment starts to then dictate who you are, how you behave, and exposure. You'd be surprised the impact on a young person that can go abroad for the first time in their lives. A lot of young people will never experience getting on a plane or having that experience, creating that mental marker so that they can aspire to do that for themselves in the future. Really, really important to expose them to new and different things. Another thing that is really, really common, we've just done that. So why do we feel like this? Quite often they might feel that they are to blame for their circumstances, for the trauma, their fear, the trauma when they maybe experience those suicidal thoughts or poor ways of coping because of their circumstances. That may reinforce shame. Shame and guilt are quite huge when it comes to mental health. And it basically means that we have to show these young people that their context, their situation doesn't define them. That's really, really important. And alternative routes to education is quite key as well. Alternative provisions that are actually functioning and do well and actually get young people some sort of academic attainment. So we are coming to the end. So shame is experienced. It functions as an urgent signal that danger is here. The danger of rejection, failure, exposure, and abandonment. We've talked a lot about attachments, the father deficit. It's an experience rooted in interpersonal relationships, so how we relate to others. We think of Maslow, the hierarchy of needs, that esteem, the safety, in terms of how we connect with people, how we show affection, and how that's reinforced. It threatens the very basic human experience of being alive and needing to belong, to be loved, and to be accepted. Quite often, young people in those circumstances, if they are maybe abused or impacted at home, you know, if they think, well, you know, this is my family, they're supposed to love me, how can I trust someone else if that's what family do? And that can build those barriers, those walls that they start to put up, that Caroline talked about so much with the young people that she works with. So yeah, and fear, again, something that we've pulled out in terms of young people, the experiences around mental health. So Steve O'Connell, who was the chairman of the Police and Crime Committee, said, in light of the rise in serious youth violence in London, and again, London gets a lot of bad press in terms of the violence. There is violence, but there are other areas where violence is a lot higher. The committee met with the police and those organisations working with young people to identify reasons for worrying trends and to hear how it might better be prevented. We found that fear of violence is fueling violence, and this is particularly the case with knife crime. I deliver stop and search workshops through the Police and Crime Commissioner's Office, and that's something that young people say quite often, because they fear someone might use a weapon on them. They maybe carry a weapon and see as a way of protecting themselves, but actually statistics show that if they've got a weapon, they're more likely to maybe end up losing their lives or being harmed by knife crime. So more of a chance that they will get away unharmed if they don't pull a knife and then someone else reacts rather than being responsive to a situation. What are your thoughts on that? Fear. Does that drive a lot of the crime when we're thinking about the individuals?
Yeah, hugely. Absolutely hugely. I asked one of the young lads who's done a few knife point robberies, who I've got, and I said, why'd you carry a knife, blah, blah, blah. And he said, I'll be honest, he said, I'm a bit of a shithouse. I've never even had a physical fist fight in my life. And he said, and I don't know, I'd probably get battered. So he started carrying it just from that. You know.
So fear. So again, I think you've just linked into maybe the impact 3.1, explain the impact of violence trauma on individuals, because of what he's actually seen that has driven his fear, and that fear, the outcome of that has been him carrying a knife, and that's, you know, part of that fueling part of that gang and youth violence sort of like arena, isn't it? Worrying. Thank you very much.
I did a workshop with some youth offending. They were all boys, coincidentally. And it was about knife crime. And we stood up and did a demo, and two of them lifted up their tops, and they had vests on underneath. And you know, that was because they feared that they were coming to an evening intervention. And literally they had taxis from their house to the door, but they still put vests on just in case.
Flipping hell. What a world when young people are risk assessing their way to school. Absolute travesty, really, that we're kind of in that space. But that's literally what our young people are doing. They are carrying out risk assessments. So I can't go that way, or I better not go there, or I might have to leave a bit later just in case I see, you know. I just think, you know, I don't know if I would have been able to cope with that from a mental health perspective when I was at school. I mean,
I think as well, I've noticed hardly any of them are using public transport, like hardly any. You know, it's all taxis, and then there's the pressure to finance the taxis because they're too scared to get the public transport as well.
So the impact, explain the impact of violence and trauma on individuals in a gang-related environment. So that's a financial sort of like element, isn't it? The violence has fueled the fear, which fuels potentially more violence or drug selling, because they have to fund that lifestyle, or they have to fund that safety, being able to pay for an Uber. The money's got to come from somewhere. Wow. Thank you for your input, guys. So are you young and traumatized? What some of these young people might experience is those sleepless nights. We've mentioned the insomnia. Insomnia or sleep deprivation is still used as torture in some countries. The deprivation of sleep can be and is really, really impacting on our body clocks. Our circadian rhythm knows when it gets dark that we are going to start to fall asleep. We fight against that by turning the lights on, watching TV, staying up late. Our bodies will tell us when we are tired. When we fight against that, we kind of get out of kilter, and that's how we can lead to burnout. If young people aren't sleeping because they are hypervigilant through their PTSD, because of the fear of retaliation, they will be impacted by maybe the sweating, the loss of appetite. But what they might do is smoke weed or drink alcohol, and that might be a lot of the only intake. So going back to that video where Akala talked about like your liver, and it being really important to detox. I mean, how many young people do you know that really attend their dentist appointments, have physical health checks, or think about detoxing? Do you think that they understand like that sleep hygiene, the mental health hygiene? Do we think that young people have that understanding?
No.
Is that you, Anne?
No, sorry, it's Nikki again. No.
Nikki, yeah, no. So quite a lack of understanding. We don't teach them enough. When we identify, I mean, if we identify, said when I go into schools, what I hear a lot, an example, a young man who had lost 2 friends within 6 months to knife crime, and he had witnessed at least one of them. And I went in to support, was told that there were loads of behaviours. I'm like, okay, miss, what's going on? And she explained what support's been in place. Absolutely no support. And they're looking at manage moving this young person who's just had 2 significant complicated griefs. And that fear that he's next, but they're looking to manage moving rather than support him. I think sometimes the systems in place don't actually meet the needs of young people, which is sad. So mood swings, we said, could be linked to the depression, loss of purpose. If young people lose hope, that's when they, it's the nihilistic sort of view. They don't care whether or not they live or die. They don't really have that worth of their life, and they become more reckless. I think it was you, Anne, that talked about those reckless behaviors. Mm-hmm. Maybe not just sexual. It can be getting into fights, not defending yourself, or just getting into fights. Yes. Higher risk of violence. Go on.
Yeah, no, you're right. Higher risk of violence, and just, the sort of weapons you actually see them carry when they're arrested, and you have to go represent them. It's like, how would you be carrying that around with you?
When my brother was unwell, he would take, my mom is like Jamaican. She left Jamaica when she was 9 years old, but she's a Yardie true and true. And he took up her machete, and he would be walking around with the machete in his trousers.
That's what these young 14-year-olds carry,
Yeah, I got involved with sitting on police panels and just trying to inform their practice about therapeutic contact around mental health, because my brother was having so much contact with the police. He would have the police helicopters, the police dogs out, armed police. It was just a nightmare. But yeah, done a lot of work with the police in them sort of like understanding. But recently, they used to have the street triage where if you dialed 999, you would get the policeman or woman, the unmarked car, the ambulance worker, and I think it was someone from the trust as well, the mental health trust. They've disbanded that, so that's no longer in place. And if you've seen the news recently, I think London has kind of gone with the announcement that they will be attending less and less mental health occurrences. My only concern with that will be that when police do arrive, the situation's probably going to have escalated a lot more, and they will only be seeing people that are quite traumatized because they're experiencing a mental health episode, maybe at a point of crisis rather than before, so they could build that rapport. So yeah, lots to maybe consider. But maybe a need for attention. Someone mentioned relationships, how that might play out in terms of their relationships, how they might be maybe controlling. That might be linked back to attachments, how they build relationships and experience people. We've talked about the anger, we've talked about the rage, and we've looked at that case study of that young man. the constant need to be around people. So maybe not isolating yourself, needing to be out there with people because actually you feel safer. I think it was you again, and over-sexualized behavior, that promiscuity. Yeah, we must remember though, when people are young or under the legal age of consent, it's not over-sexualized behavior when they are having intercourse with people that are of adult age. It is rape. It is not consensual because they are not able to consent because of their age. So yeah, and victim blaming, thinking about the language we might use when we are responding to that behavior is very, very important as well, because it might be how they've ever been shown love, or what they perceive to be love. All right. So just some shared risk factors. We've kind of looked at the visual, I think we explored mental health, and there was something else we explored, but the individual, childhood, conduct disorders, learning disabilities. People with learning disabilities or maybe on the spectrum are going to be at a higher risk in terms of exploitation and in terms of their mental health. Quite often, their learning disabilities can go undiagnosed. And if they are undiagnosed, that leads to that additional sort of like frustrations, even things like dyslexia within school. That might lead to young people masking, being the class joker because they don't get things and don't want to be maybe seen as stupid or not knowing. Relationships, postnatal depression, child abuse, neglect, domestic violence. Loads of changes in relation to domestic violence. There's some research through COVID. They don't normally, in terms of domestic violence, collate the stats for people that are victims of domestic violence for under 18s, but they did some research on like questionnaires, 16-year-olds, and there was actually a rise in young people presenting with domestic violence. And I would say that there's a clear link sometimes in the gang and how girls, you'll probably go on to that in terms of this course, girls and their role within gangs, poor parental monitoring. Some parents just don't know what their kids are up to. Community and society, we've explored that. We've looked at the risk to communities. We've said, you know, it might be retaliation from communities. It might be that disruption, the fear that communities experience because of the high crime levels. Low social capital, we've talked about how certain communities will have additional areas of intersectionality to contend with, the types of shops or facilities in poorer areas. I mean, one thing that's really common now is HMOs, houses of multiple occupation, and they're popping up everywhere. But I remember reading, I think it was Solihull, they tried to put one and there was such an uproar. There are certain communities you are just not going to find those places. So in terms of like the social structure, you see where poorer communities and intersectionality is generally clustered together.